away from the dictionary definition of a constitution. A constitution must have purpose, and the purpose must be to create a nation that conduces to the greatest happiness of the greatest number of people. That is what a constitution must be. And having set the objective of the constitution, you then frame a constitution to achieve that objective.
Because we really do have a race problem. Those divisions are real. We see it in our politics, we see it in our trade union. We see that they take the divisions with them. Look at where people live in this US. You have enclaves in the Bronx and in Richmond Hill and in Brooklyn. They're taking the division with them.
Women are dying in the streets, and we have a government pontificating running around campaigning for women's vote. No women should vote in this election coming up unless there is something done to the legislation, as Magistrate Kim is advocating.
That voices like ours that are not in the political trench fighting it out, voices like ours should become stronger. One of the things about the Caribbean is that we have never had one discourse. Bass will know the days of the New World and the Old World and the radical left and so on. What we had was this concourse of ideas, which I think in the early days of independence pushed us in a certain direction. We have got to move back to that point of having these multiple discourses.
Good morning and welcome again to Vision for a New Guyana here at our studios in Richmond Hill. Today is a very special day for Guyana. On October the 5th, the PNC, the People's National Congress Party, was officially formed by its founder leader. Today, many PNC groups across the globe is celebrating that day. And here in New York, there's many fundraising activities for the PNC. We want to wish them well in their endeavors. Also today, in 1992, October the 5th, President Desmond Hoyt have restored democracy to our country. It has been a long journey. Over the years, we have had problems from 1968 elections when many in the world think the elections were rigged, but we had a government anyway. 1992 came and the PPP went into office. What has happened since then? We had 28 years of PNC rule, then we had 23 years of PPP rule. Where does Guyana stand at this point in time? When we elect a new government in 1992, we expect that they would have looked at the issues and the problems facing our country and work towards Guyana's development. Did that happen? It is for the people of Guyana to decide if it happens. What happened mostly in the PPP 23 years in office? They had, of course, jobs given to the executives, to their children, and to their friends. I remember Dr. Luncheon, that famous statement he made when he said that Guyanese of African descent are not qualified to hold ambassador position. Such a ridiculous statement to a country that is multi-ethnic. Now in 2015, we voted in a new party into office, APNU AFC, with the hope that Guyana will shake the shackles off from these 50-odd years of PNC and PPP rule. What happened? Nothing changed. Same thing happened. Job for the boys. The ethnic composition of most of our offices in Guyana, we had 17 public permanent secretaries, 16 of whom are from one ethnic group. We have a police commissioner and 4 deputy, all of one ethnic group. What are we talking about? Today, the Constitution is being stretched to its limit. We are now on uncharted waters. We don't know what the future holds with what is going on in Guyana. Now come on board October 5th, 2019, we have in our studios a very dynamic young man. He is the leader and presidential candidate of the Liberty and Justice Party. He has formed this party basically from among our indigenous people, the first people of Guyana. If the Indians support by and large the PPP, the Africans by and large support the PNC, is it time that the Amerindians or First People support a party of their own? It is scary, but it's true. And the reality is that the Amerindians have been taken for a ride for a long time. They've been used repeatedly by both the PPP and the PNC for the elections to office, and then they were discarded as third-class citizens. This morning, it is my honor and privilege to welcome to our studios here in New York, Mr. Lennox Schumann. He's here for 2 meetings today. One will be at 2 o'clock at the Queens Library at 118th Street and Hillside Avenue. For those of you who live in the Queens area, please try to make that meeting at 2 o'clock. And then this evening at 5, we are at 1074 Rogers Avenue in Brooklyn. So those of you in Brooklyn, you can please come to that meeting. Come and ask Mr. Schumann all the serious questions, the hard questions. And as we were talking earlier, politicians say one thing to the public, and when elected to office, sometimes things change. We hope that that does not happen in Mr. Schumann's case. Mr. Schumann, welcome to our studio.
Thank you, Charles. It's really, really good to be here in New York. I haven't been in New York for quite some time. It's changed quite a bit, I think, from the last time I visited, and my goal in being in New York has obviously changed quite a bit also. But I think this being in New York under the circumstances has given me an opportunity at this point to reconnect with Guyanese and to understand exactly why it is that they continue to live outside of Guyana when Guyana has so much to offer.
And we are glad. We want to welcome you to New York, and we hope that you have a really excellent meetings today as we plan those 2 meetings for you. Mr. Schumann, I know by profession you're a pilot. Guyana needs a new direction, a new navigation, a new path. What is your vision to take Guyana out of its current morass?
Well, that's a very good question, Charles. Let me start from the aviation roots to begin with. There's a reason why aviation is the safest industry globally, and why it is that aviation becomes so important in getting a man to the moon and launching all these space programs and stuff. It is because of discipline. And there has been an absence of discipline in Guyana, whether it is political, economic, or otherwise. And my presence in Guyana is to be able to bring that kind of discipline into governance in Guyana. When you look at the evolution of systems, evolution of economies, all of these things have to take a very structured approach, and the Liberty and Justice Party is committed to that. Now, I want to correct you on one of the opening statements that you made that, it almost seems natural to have an indigenous party. I think there is an element that is missing there. It is not an indigenous party. It is a party for the people who are disenchanted with the current political system, i.e. status quo, and for the people who have continued to suffer under what I'd say 53 years of poor administration. And we are here to ensure that their voices get heard and that the policies that affect or that are being implemented in Guyana positively affect their lives and their children's lives.
Beautiful. So Guyana do need a new direction. Do you agree that one of the questions that comes up a lot of times is, give us some specific things. If you are elected president of Guyana in the next election, come March 3rd, March 2nd, by March the 5th, hopefully we'll know who wins the election. Let us assume that Lennox Schumann is elected president of Guyana. What is the first thing you will do as president to restore some confidence to the people of Guyana?
Well, let's look at what historically has happened. When Burnham wrote the Constitution, or let's say not Burnham, but the PNC The PPP championed constitutional reform. Then they got into office. All they would have done is made cosmetic changes to the Constitution, and then the AFC and this current administration went in with the same battle cry, really, and they haven't done anything. So I think it is important that the people who would have elected this administration and any future administration look to their leadership for comprehensive constitutional reform. That is one. The second thing is addressing what we call institutional corruption. So many institutions are corrupt. You start with the National Procurement and Tender Board, you go with the police services, a variety of them, GRA. All of these institutions, corruption becomes part of them. It is part of their DNA at this point. And for us, in attacking that, well, I don't want to attack the people, but it has to be dealt with from a policy level. I think with instituting the aggressive use of technology would start to bring check to all of these corrupt practices. When you look at the education system, for example, last night I was having this discussion with a few people about what is it that exists in Guyana. Basically, we are still stuck with a post-colonial system. Meanwhile, the rest of the world has evolved, and we are left behind. All we've done is a patchwork of systems. What we have to do, I wouldn't say demolish, but I'd say realign the education structure. And Article 27 of the Constitution actually talks about this, right? That every Guyanese is entitled to free education that is culturally appropriate and looks at the future needs of Guyana, but yet we have not done that. So I think those are some of the opening things that we would start with. When we look at realigning the institutions, there are some things that happen in the Ministry of Education that never gets translated to the Ministry of Agriculture and vice versa. How do we now find a happy marriage so that the institutions work effectively and efficiently to meet the people's needs? I think those are some of the things that we look at.
Beautifully put. The last election campaign with the AFC and APNU, one of their guiding principle was that they will have a constitutional reform commission. We know they said within the first 100 days, if I'm correct. They did something, but it's in a shelf somewhere. I think the attorney at law, Nigel Hughes, did something, and it is now in the Prime Minister's office. If you are elected again, what will you put in place to make genuine reform to our Constitution? That's one of your points that you've just raised, that's one of the things that you will do.
Charles, and once again, you have to look at what the cause of these people is. I mean, when this administration entered into office, they championed constitutional reform. We know that the report was tabled by Nigel Hughes in Parliament. It still sits on the Prime Minister's desk. But then on the other side of that, you also have the PPP who have said openly that constitutional reform is not part of their agenda and it has to go to a referendum. Well, I would challenge them on that. I would say, why do we have to sit there and go for a referendum when the parties that people are electing are running on a platform of constitutional reform? There could be no clearer mandate than that. You would have won because the people identify with what it is you're championing. You've got the divine right of kings that still resides in the Constitution. How do we do that? I thought we had a president, not a king. And even to that, are we to say that a king cannot be charged? There are so many flaws. Depoliticizing the Guyana Elections Commission would be one of the key changes that need to be implemented. We have seen what GCOM has and has not done, especially from December 21st and now. And I think it is important that GCOM be given that opportunity to operate with absolute independence. There are so many commissions. The Human Rights Commission has never been established. The Indigenous Peoples Commission has failed. There are so many commissions that are non-functional in this sense. I think it is time that we start re-examining some of these things and ensuring that they, once again, address the people's needs. And it is important that the Constitution does that.
Excellent. So you're telling our viewing audience and to the Guyanese public that one of your first priority will be to look at that constitution and see what the people really need.
Absolutely.
Good. Secondly, you talk about corruption within our institutions. Now, any country that has institutions that does not work, that country is going down the drain. In Guyana, corruption seems to be the number one stumbling block to progress. You have addressed the issue and you said that you will revamp, you will reinstitute. If someone is accountable, you hold them accountable. How would you go about ensuring that our institutions, one, they're independent, and two, they work for the people?
The use of technology, let's look at what happens on the ground, right? And I could tell you from my experience as chief in my community, we were given 1.5 million Guyana dollars, the equivalent of 7,000 US, to execute a project in the community. When we provided a bill to the Ministry of Indigenous Peoples Affairs, we had to wait on a piece of document that we were going to take to the Ministry of Finance. We wait there for them to search through everything. When they find it, we have to take that check now and go to the bank. And then we get to the bank, then we have to provide our deposit slips and all that back to the ministry. The use of technology would say, look, village people, we give you this money, and you provide us with your proposal. It is going to go straight to finance, and that money gets automatically deposited in your account. What you have done in all that process is now, I'm not saying that it happened, but there are potential areas where someone would say, look, you know what, finance officer, I want this, here's a little squeeze. Then you go to the Ministry of Finance and you have to pay a little bribe again. Then you go to the bank. The point being is that the more hands you interact with, the more opportunity there is for fraudulent or illicit activities. If you could reduce that from 1 to 1, maybe 1 to 2, then what you would have done is eliminate multiple channels for corruption in that sense. The use of technology. Let's take the police, for example. About a month ago, they ran a police vehicle into the trench just around Coffee. There is no GPS tracker on that. There is no video cam, no body cam. There is no dashboard cam. There is no voice recording, all of these things. Were you to now take a GPS unit and put it on each police vehicle, you obviously equip them with body cams, and then you say, okay, well, you could go out and police. Then all of that stuff gets fed back to a central database. So if you could start to look at patterns, right? There's a reason why there's this massive hype about 5G because of the data analysis, data mining and harvesting. When you look at some of these patterns, then you would be able to say if a police officer or a vehicle continues to go to one point with a set pattern, then you may investigate that. Also, if they start speeding down, they can't say we're chasing a criminal. Well, what is your driving pattern? Have you been certified for this vehicle? All of these things, when you start utilizing technology for its intended purpose, you are going to notice a shift in how people conduct themselves. You're going to reduce the 4,000 plus man hours that is lost at GRA daily down to, I'd say, maybe 200, 300. Because most of the things that you can go to GRA for, you could do those things online. Thus, you don't need this massive structure, all of these staff and everything. I'm not saying that we're going to lay people off. Let's be clear. But what we can do is streamline the system so that technology now becomes an integral part of the conversation in Guyana.
Excellent. So you're saying that having technology a part of our process will help eliminate some of the corruption we have in our government.
Well, absolutely. Not only will it address corruption, I mean, look at one of the reasons why the sugar factories have failed. It is because we continue to exist in a place where we relied so heavily on manual labor. Had they transformed those estates, which I think that they had the money to do, except the PPP used it to go and build a Marriott and I don't know what else they did with it. But had they used that money for its intended purpose, they would have transformed the entire sugar industry. It would have literally eliminated the need to lay off anyone from that who were employed in that sector. We have not utilized technology. All we had to do was make it mechanized, and we could have dealt with all of these issues. Transforming an industry, it takes time, but it also takes vision. And I think that is one of the things that has been lacking in Guyana for a while.
And I'm glad you mentioned the Marriott Hotel. When you're looking for Guyana's future, do you see a role in the government getting into business, or should government create opportunities for the business community to come in and launch their program and give them all incentive that is required or necessary to launch Guyana's forward? How do you see the mix between government and the private sector?
Charles, if you look globally, when you look at businesses and business environment, there is no country that takes control of its economy and creating jobs that could say that they have a sound economic model. Government's responsibility is to create the environment where those opportunities exist. How do they do that? They do it by policy, they do it by laws, and they do it obviously by their various tax codes, amongst many other things. But basically the government's responsibility is to create the environment where businesses can come and invest and where they can thrive. We have not seen that in Guyana. To say that the government has to create jobs, I would challenge anyone who say that we are going to create any number of jobs. I mean, I heard Mr. Ali saying that he's going to create 50,000 jobs. I want to know, where are those 50,000 jobs coming? Is it that you are going to go and pay another 50,000 people like you did 20,000 Armenian to be community safety officers that did next to nothing? Basically, what you're telling me is that you're going to get involved in a scheme to buy 50,000 votes. When I look at that, that is what I see. Compared to sitting there and saying, by the revision of policies, it is going to be a little bit of a painful road, yes. It is going to take time, yes. But what we will do is to create the environment by revising our tax code, by creating a tax-free economic zone, by ensuring that we put Guyana and Guyanese first, by creating an environment where Guyanese in the diaspora can come and reinvest in Guyana. Remember, we talked about technology earlier. When we start to revise how we do policing, I would tell everyone in the diaspora to start looking at Guyana and looking seriously at how they could come and invest in Guyana when we start implementing these things.
It's nice to hear that, Mr. Schumann. And again, let me ask you this question. President Schumann, will you implement these policies you're talking about without fear and favor, without regard to a support base, without regard to the ethnicity of Guyanese, that every Guyanese, regardless who they are, where they come from, that they will have an equal opportunity to come to our country and launch an investment that we have never seen before? Do we have that commitment from a President Schumann?
Charles, let me use a small story to maybe highlight where I come from. As the leader in my community when I was there, we implemented a policy that no one is to play music beyond 10 o'clock during weeknights. It provides the right environment for students to learn, for teachers to be rested and ready for school the next day. All businesses agreed to that. And my brother was operating a business in the community. So one night, I think he probably took a little bit of liberty, and thinking that his brother is the chief, he is going to go and play music during the weeknight until 2 o'clock. The next morning, I showed up at his door. Hello, how are you? I gave him a ticket for $9,000. I went away. He was upset. He didn't talk to me for an entire month. Then he paid that, and then he went on again. The second fine after that was $25,000. So then he played music again, and I showed up with another ticket for him. After that, he didn't talk to me for another 3 months. So basically, if you cannot implement and execute things objectively, then you are going to continue to have a Guyana that exists today and has existed for 53 years. When we talk about without fear or favor, that is what we're all about. We don't see that just because this one is related, just because that one is related, that they are going to find favor in us. What we want to do is to create a level playing field for all Guyanese. No one should be asked when they come into our office, oh, what party did you vote for? Oh, who did you vote for in the last election? Those things, your franchise is a personal franchise. That is not a public franchise. It should not determine what kind of benefits you get. And those things continue to happen today. you can't get this because you might vote for those guys or you'll vote for those guys based on suspicion. We have to remember that every Guyanese has a right to access these public institutions. They have a right to equal access across the board, regardless of political affiliation. And what we intend on doing is to ensure that that constitutional right is respected.
Okay, your story there, Mr. Schumann, it's so important that if your own brother will be charged for committing a crime, that shows that your standard you're setting is really, really high.
Not quite committing a crime, Charles.
Well,
he would have
the law.
Right. He would have
Disobeying
violated the community governance
it's a
in
crime.
that sense.
The law is a crime, right?
Yeah.
So we're getting some nice feedback, Mr. Schumann. You sound like a very good president from Chan. Chan also says Guyana need an honest government. And Shahi just said our judicial system is also very corrupt. And I know you mentioned mentioned the corruption in our system. You talk about the procurement commission, every aspect. I know, there are stories of policemen stopping you on the street to give you a ticket. Instead of giving you a ticket, you give them a bribe, and then the ticket is gone. So the government also loses revenue. And of course, the man pay less or the woman pay less, and everybody is happy. But then the revenue stream for the government is also restricted. And the sad news is that Guyana really seems to be corruption is kind of part of the deal. And if you don't become corrupt, something seems to be wrong with you. How can we change that mindset of the Guyanese to say, listen, if you do what you're doing, you will go before the court and you will go to prison. And I remember a story of the Prime Minister, again, sorry bring up Singapore, but one gentleman, one minister, whose overseas trip was paid for by a businessman. When he came back to the country, he was arrested and put in prison because the Prime Minister, the thing is in management, as we all know, the tone starts at the top. If the tone is not good at the top, the whole corporation is rotten. So the thing is, there is so much things to do, and will you commit to ensure that corruption is not eliminated, but it's difficult to eliminate it, but we can reduce it as much as we can?
Charles, here's the thing. I cannot state or overstate how important it is that we look at technology and how it is going to help us to curb some of these things. But while I have the opportunity, let me say this to all our viewers and all our followers, all Guyanese who are watching, whether you're in the US or in Guyana or wherever you are. Every time you pay a bribe, if it is 1 cent, $1, $100, $100,000, what you have done is deteriorated and served to undermine the very systems that are meant to not only protect you, but to protect your children. Now think of it this way. If I'm driving and I hit someone and I pay the police a few $100,000 to have the case washed away, right? I go home free, and then here comes my child walking on the street and someone hit that person, hit my child in the street, and they pay the police a few $100,000 and they go away. Now, where has all of this started? It started when I choose a way to circumvent the law to pay a bribe, and now it has an effect in killing or maybe seriously harming my child. What I would ask every Guyanese is to simply refuse to pay anything. Take your minute, take your 2 minutes, take your hour, and go to the court and sit there and wait your turn. There seems to be a higher incidence of police officers not showing up at the court. There are cases where, the prosecution, for example, their key witness or the police officer who would have filed the charges are failing to show up. There is only one reason why they are going to fail to show up. It is because someone would have paid them to not show up. But once again, if we use technology, you are going to find that money trail as to where the money came in, where it was spent, and now you have an opportunity to charge people for corruption. But all of these things, you can't just go and arrest someone and pick them out of the crowd. You'd be accused of witch hunting. What you need to do is to develop the system so that it touches everyone equally.
That is really a breath of fresh air there, Mr. Schumann, that it's indication I'm getting that you will be a no-nonsense president if you're elected president of Guyana. And I hope that the people of Guyana, looking at this program, and the supporters here around the world, tell their family in Guyana, come election on March the 2nd, vote for the Liberty and Justice Party. Because I think I see a really brand new, bright, excellent future if we have a president who will, take it by the horn and change things in Guyana. When we come back, we will continue discussion with Mr. Lennox Schumann. He's here in New York again to attend a meeting, 2 meetings today. One will be at the Queen's Library at 118th Street and Hillside Avenue at 2 o'clock this evening. For those of you in the Queens area, please come and see Mr. Schumann and ask him your questions. Again, this afternoon at 5 o'clock, another meeting is on Rogers Avenue, 1074 Lizzie Daycare, and that will be at 5 o'clock. So please, on the screen right now, the meeting at the Queen's Library, 11811 Hillside Avenue, from 2 to 4 o'clock. The library closed at 5, so you really need to come early. We want to start the meeting early. We have enough time to ask questions, and then we'll leave after that. So when we come back, we will continue the discussion. Thank you.
L'Amour is helping to sponsor Globespan 24/7 programs. L'Amour will be celebrating Diwali on board the Princess Luxury Yacht with a cruise on October 19th at 6:30 p.m. Take a cruise down the Hudson with non-stop Diwali celebrations plus DJ and fashion show. Tickets start from $75. That's a Diwali cruise on board the Princess Yacht on October 19th at 6:30 p.m. Call Angeli at 845-545-9936 or Shika at 646-732-0065.
And if you're on look for a public accountant, we recommend Sugrim and Associates. They do personal taxes, business, partnership, not-for-profit, estate and trust, accounting, and payroll. Their address is 20507 Hillside Avenue, Suite 24, Hollis, New York, and alternative 13501 Linden Boulevard, South Ozone Park. You can call 929-460-5043 or email them at boom.sugrimcpa@gmail.com.
Okay, welcome back. Thank you, Devin. Mr. Schumann, there's some questions that came on board on the screen, and one of it says that investors need incentives. I know you talk about the tax laws and you talk about different things. Also, there is a lot of crime in Guyana, and it throw away investors. I know I mentioned this in this program, that Guyanese, at 6 o'clock, you have to shut your doors and actually go inside because you're afraid someone will come to rob you or beat you. Norman asked that question. I want you to tell Norman, what are some incentives that investors will get? And what about the crime and the corruption? And Josh says, do like Modi in India. Jail these damn corrupt people and take away their assets. Are you committed to doing that?
Charles, we are committed to ensuring that Guyana reverts back to the rule of law. At the end of the day, if we become a law-abiding country and we are all law-abiding citizens, then you are going to find a lot of the issues are going to be addressed in that. In terms of the criminal activities, let's take a country like Germany, for example, where 90+% of the population have gone to university, have a university degree. Governance in itself takes a different tone. The minute you start educating people, you're going to find that petty crimes are going to reduce. That's one. The second thing is you create an economic opportunity for them. But once again, the government cannot go and create jobs. We have to create the right environment. And you are quite correct. There are people who want to come to Guyana and invest. But we would always have difficulties if we continue to sit there with that untreated cancer of corruption. When we start to address corruption, you are going to find that the petty thieves are not going to go and pay off their friend who knows someone in the police services to have the case washed away. When we start to create economic opportunities for all Guyanese, you are going to find that it is going to have a very serious positive impact on crime, as in you're going to have criminal activities reduce. We are talking about closing your doors at 6 o'clock. I'm not sure 6 o'clock is the time, because I've
Maybe
seen
earlier.
I've gone around and I've seen people who are still out beyond those times. But I want to go back to how we could address corruption. We start by addressing corruption by not subscribing to corruption. It doesn't matter what systems you put in place. If you cannot find people who are going to subscribe to the laws and subscribe to the anti-corruption policies, then what happens is that those very people are going to undermine the very systems that we are building to address the very things that continue to plague the Guyanese society.
What I'm getting, Mr. Schumann, and I want to put you on the spot again. I would like, and I'm sure hundreds of thousands of Guyanese would like, to see a President Schumann will stamp corruption on his head, full stop, no excuses. Do we have that commitment from you,
Absolutely,
sir?
absolutely.
We have a studio audience, and we now open to audience. If you have a question, Diane, you want? You can sit here.
Good afternoon, viewers, and thank you for joining us in this segment with Charles Sugrim and this candidate here today, Lennox Schumann. So my question to you, Mr. Schumann, and I'm a woman, and it's been pretty much a man's world with whether it's here in United States or Guyana, right? With all the political parties, you grew up with that. Now, as myself, an advocate and an activist, and more women will probably vote, not probably, will vote in this upcoming election. Tell me, for me, as an advocate, why I should encourage women and youth to vote for you, and what plans are in place and programs for them. Thank you.
Excellent question. Thank you, Diane. Mr. Schumann.
Well, thank you for your question. I think if anyone wants to look at reasons to part ways from the old, just look at history. You look at what has not been done. There still continues to be a high incidence of domestic violence in Guyana. Girls still continue to have their rights violated at a fairly young age. You've got a lot of people in many communities who continue to suffer from sexual exploitation. And most of these things actually has to do with a lack of opportunities. I would tell you that by ensuring that Article 27 of the Constitution is met, which deals with free education, you are going to find that there is going to be a departure from that. Most people subscribe to crime when they don't have the knowledge, when they have a dire need, or sometimes, I mean, we can't speak for the people who have mental issues. In terms of what programs are available for within the LJP for women, we are a party of equal opportunities and equal rights. We don't believe in gender superiority. We are a rights-based party. Once your rights are enshrined in the Constitution, then we have an obligation to respect that. When we start to respect the rights of every single Guyanese, what we will do is address those very same things that you were talking about. In 2015, UNICEF did a study on, and I'm going to bring a little bit of Indigenous perspective because I think those things are sometimes underreported, the status of women and children in Indigenous communities. And through that report, you can see the effects of poor economic activities, I'd say poor social support, poor education, amongst many other things that continue to plague those communities that have never been addressed. Those things are exhibited differently on the coast. For example, you would find young girls who travel with minibuses to and fro every day tend to gravitate towards the minibus conductor or the driver, putting them in a situation where they could be raped and stuff like these. What we have to do is to reorient Guyana in that sense. I don't know how many of these bus drivers and conductors actually purchased their license or how many of them actually went through a process to earn it. But that being said, you look at how they drive, they create this bad boy atmosphere. And sometimes girls tend to, at least this is from observation, tend to gravitate towards that. We have not provided enough opportunities in the educational institutions to ensure that people want to stay in school. You still go to school, it's still a punitive system. If you don't show up to school, you don't do a whole lot of things. We live in a punitive society. We have to change that and make it a society of reward, where people, once they start to show that they're capable of something, that the rewards are there equally for everyone, regardless of gender, regardless of race.
Diana asked a really great question there about women. Also, we have a huge problem in Guyana with domestic violence. And I think both the men and the women need help. As we said, right here in New York, we were talking about 10 o'clock in the morning, the guys is in the beer garden drinking beers. The same thing applied to Guyana. I mean, early morning, the guys is in a rum shop. And then, you know, problems at home, and then they take it out on our women folks. It's really a serious problem. And we've seen so many women die at the hands of their spouse. Would you work with all the communities, especially the women's group, to ensure that we eradicate this cancer we have in our society?
Charles, that's a very interesting perspective. You know, I've gone to so many women, gender-based violence workshops and so on. And generally, when I go to some of these workshops, you would see 90+% are women. Now, if women continue to talk just to women about gender-based violence, then you're not really addressing one of the key stakeholders, which are the men. What you need to do is to ensure that men have more presence at some of these things so that they understand, that they get that perspective. We can't sit here and talk about women's issue, you and I, because we're men. If we want to understand a woman's perspective, bring her in the room. Likewise, if you want to understand a man's perspective in terms of gender-based violence, then engage them in that discussion. What are the things that drive them to that, and how do you work to address those things? But there is no silver bullet that is going to address gender-based violence and some of those things. It has to be a multifaceted approach. Aside from the education component, revenue generation, economy, a whole host of things. It is a multifaceted. It is one problem that has so many different variables that need to be addressed, and that is what we intend on doing. There was one thing that that was brought up there about what do we have in place for youths. Guyana continues to export between 20 and 25,000 of our young, educated minds every year. From however long, right now we have 1.4 million Guyanese living out of Guyana in a country now with a population of 750,000. The reason why that continues to happen is because we have not done what I would say the right things to ensure that the people in Guyana, or the educated young people, find a place in society. If you look at the past administration or administrations, most of the jobs went to their friends, their family friends, their buddy friend, their cousin, and so on and so forth. Meanwhile, you have the people who are competent and qualified looking for a job, and they cannot find a job because you would have found incompetence and put them in that position and expecting superior results. If we want Guyana to grow, what we have to do is to transform it into a meritocracy, where people who are qualified get the jobs that they're qualified for. And when you start to do that, you give them that room to be creative, to think outside of the box, and you are going to get the superior results because you're putting superior people to work in an environment. You cannot take mediocrity, put it in that position, and expect superior results. It is a marriage that is never going to work.
I agree. But also we have to bear in mind that the national pie has to increase. And the bigger the pie is, the more Guyanese will be able to share in that pie. And we're hoping that the oil and gas sector might be able to fill that void. Chan asked the question, how long will it take to turn Guyana around? Do you have any crystal ball to tell us what time period Guyana can really turn around to start the process of real development?
Charles, I'm glad you brought that question up because that is something that we've been pondering and trying to figure out with our framework what it is. We are looking at the 22nd century framework. But I would tell all Guyanese this. The Liberty and Justice Party, we're not about magic. The only magic has to come from your vision and what you intend on doing. And you cannot sit there and look at the Liberty and Justice Party, the PPP, the APN, your ANOG, or any political party that is going to promise you a silver bullet and say that they're going to deliver on that. It is going to take painstaking planning, work, and execution, all of those things. For us, we would say if anyone is interested in magic turnaround in that sense, then the circus is a good place to start. But anyone who is interested in building something that is long-lasting, that could see Guyana transform, then the Liberty and Justice Party is the place to start. We estimate that maybe in 3 electoral cycles, you are going to see profound changes in Guyana. Let's take the infrastructural development in Guyana. We've got roughly 2,400 kilometers of roads, of which 60% are paved. In 53 years, under 2,000 kilometers of paved roads. Yet you have communities that you're going to have these ministers go in, encourage them to do farming, but yet there's no market access. In fact, there's not even a market for it. For Guyana to truly transform, we need to undertake a massive, massive infrastructural development framework. We need to revise our economic policies and to develop tax policies that make sense for Guyanese. And not only Guyanese, for the people who are interested in investing in Guyana. In the US, for example, Trump said America first. And look at the effects it has had, or the effect it has had on not only the psyche, but in terms of the American job market. You've got bailouts here, giving off billions to people that you would have put out of work. I'm not saying that the same applies to Guyana, but we need to look at how do we utilize what is being produced in Guyana to benefit the Guyanese population.
Beautiful. And I think you mentioned the operative word, our infrastructure really need to be looked at. I know it's very costly. And part of continuing program that we will hear on this program is how can we launch that massive investment structure to enhance our infrastructure in Guyana. We have an audience here, and is there any question any audience would want to ask? We're wrapping up shortly. One question Shahid asked, a really important question, is will you correlate, the Constitution says that the party with the most votes will win the presidency. The indications are that it's unlikely any one of the parties contesting the next election will have the majority of seats in parliament. There is where you come in, Mr. Schumann. If your party becomes that party that will determine the future of Guyana, would you work with the PNC or the PPP, whoever wins the presidency, to launch Guyana forward? What would be the party's, the Liberty and Justice Party position?
The Liberty and Justice Party is a party of independence. We were formed and we were launched on the 12th of January 2019. When we did that, there was no other political party present, even though we sent out the invitation to all of them. That being said, we fully intend on maintaining our independence going forward. And we are going to work, our intent is obviously to be the next administration, and we intend on working to ensure that all Guyanese benefit from our patrimony.
And that's a very beautiful point you raised there, is that the bottom line is that the Guyanese people must be the beneficiary and not a political party. And I hope that the people of Guyana who are listening and watching this program, and those of you who will be, all of you going to the polls, I want you to consider Mr. Schumann. Look at the proposal. They have a manifesto out. Look at their policies. We are not able to go through all the details in the manifesto this morning because it's only 1 hour and we're almost coming to the end of that program. But I want you to look at it seriously and see if in that position, is it time now that we have maybe our first people, a descendant of our first people, be the next president of our country? That would be a great day for Guyana. We have seen the Africans have contributed significantly to Guyana's development. The Indians have contributed significantly to Guyana's development, and so also has the Amerindians. The question is, we have had leaders from the African community, we have had leaders from the Indian community. Maybe it's time now for a leader from the First People community, which is the Amerindians. So I hope that the Guyanese people will look at this and look at Mr. Schumann. I know you're very articulate in your answers. You're very poised. You know exactly what is right for Guyana. And I'm very elated to know that you will stamp out corruption if given the opportunity to do it. And I think Guyana needs that no-nonsense president. I don't care who the person is. If it's your wife and she commits an offense, she will be prosecuted. If it's your mother, your father, no one is above the law. And I think if Guyana get to that stage, we are on our way to a really, really bright future. Again, our audience, is there anything you want to ask Mr. Schumann? Yes. Yeah, you can come here. Mr. Durga. Dr. Durga.
Thank you very much, and I'm very happy to be visiting here in New York and having the opportunity to also visit the studios here. Lennox, congratulations on taking this bold move. There are a lot of people who continue to talk about what needs to happen in Guyana. You and your colleagues have actually decided to do something about it. Now, you touched on a topic that's very close to my heart, with having competent people actually do the job, because I think for decades that's what Guyana suffered from. It's one of the most blessed countries on earth when it comes to natural resources. The only thing we didn't have before 2015 was oil, and now we also have that. But mismanagement is what I see as one of the biggest hurdles to Guyana really becoming that place that we would all love to live and work. My question to you is, you mentioned that party loyalists might have been put in places where we were expecting performance, and because they may not have had the competence, they weren't able to deliver. You yourself will have supporters in your organization as well that may get you some seats. How will you ensure, and this is a little bit of insight that I'm asking for, how will you ensure that your own party supporters who may be expecting to be in those nice positions as well, but who may not have the competence, how will you strike that balance of making sure that you let them know that you do need their support, but that you will have to put competent people in there, and where are you expecting to get these competent people from? Thank you.
Well, thank you for the question. Very valid. If you look at what has happened in Guyana, time immemorial at this point, is that you continue to, and I said it earlier, you cannot put mediocrity in a position, expect superior results. You need competent people. I would tell you that everyone within the executive of the Liberty and Justice Party understands very clearly that there is no, what I'd say, no commitment to offer them any position that they're not qualified for. And for the ones who are hoping that change will come, they also understand that the change, it is not immediate. What we will do is to implement the very systems that are needed to ensure that that change touches them. If we want to find competence, I mean, ministers have to understand their role. I've noticed that ministers sometimes go around as project managers. They want to do this, do that, do that. You cannot micromanage a system when you're in a policy position. What the country is in need of are technocrats like yourself, Dr. Dorga, and many others like Charles and a variety of other people who understand what it is and you put those technocrats in the key institutions as oversight officials, or maybe the very project managers or executioners that we are looking at. And when we start to do that, you are going to find that the people who are in the diaspora would want to come there and say, you know what, I think that there's room for me here because there are certain key areas that are deficient, and now I could find a way to contribute to that. But those things are most definitely, we cannot continue to subscribe to mediocrity. That is the fundamental thing that we have to start taking away from this. We cannot just give favors. It has to be something that addresses the country's needs, not someone's personal needs.
And I really like that. And I'm so glad that Dr. Durga is here in the office. I was very honored to work with his father and his uncle and his wife as well. We worked together at one time. And Vishnu has been really a great son of Guyana, and we really want to wish him well also in his endeavors. And I hope that, I know he's apolitical, he's not a political guy, but I'm sure that he will give Mr. Schumann as much support as is maybe necessary to ensure that our country really move forward. And I think as the question Dr. Durga asked is so pertinent, is that are we going to still, as we said, be putting square pegs in the wrong holes? But again, we need everyone to get an opportunity. And if we have to retrain them, train them again. I was talking to a gentleman, I'm a CPA, but I don't have experience in the oil and gas sector. Their accounting process, it takes, specialized training. So maybe training in that field for Guyanese engineers, geologists. We have people in Guyana, we have bright people. As a matter of fact, Guyanese, I think, are the brightest people in the Caribbean. We have excelled in every field out there. And I really believe we have the capacity, we have the potential, and I'm sure we will do well. One question Mr. Norman is asking again on the screen, Mr. Schumann, is this topic of cash transfer that has started with Professor Thomas. The president came out recently and said that he preferred to teach the Guyanese to fish rather than give them a fish. Some people within the party, I see Dr. Hines saying the other day that cash transfer, if that does not happen, might disenfranchise, or the people who support the coalition might not want to go to the polls. I mean, the PPP is saying also they're looking at the cash transfer in a different light. What are your views on the cash transfer? Is something you think we should do? Because there are poor people in Guyana who need that help. But if we make Guyanese dependent on it for the rest of their life, it might be a debt to Guyana rather than be supportive of Guyana's progress. Where do you see cash transfer?
Charles, I think that's a very valid question. I'd say any attempt to deal with cash transfer right now without a comprehensive framework, it would just be engaged in vote buying. And I have to support the president on this point. If you are to give everyone and start doing cash transfer, what you've done is replicated the 212, 213 indigenous communities that you continue to want to buy their votes. That is all that scheme is going to do. If you look at the comprehensive way to address it, let's say now you say every single Guyanese may not be entitled to cash transfer, you tie it to some kind of an index as to what their income is, what their their lifestyle dependence and all these things are. You have to tie it to their needs. What is the point of giving a billionaire in Guyana $1 million? All you've done is given him enough money to buy toothpicks for himself, whereby that could make a lot more difference for the average person who maybe makes $50,000 below minimum wage monthly, right? They can't afford clothes, they can't afford food, a whole host of things. It has to be tied to an index that is obviously going to be tied to the people's needs. I would not personally sit there and support cash transfer in that sense. It has to be tied to something. And once again, I go back to the president's remark that it would be better to teach a person how to fish than to continuously have to provide meals for them throughout their life.
Thank you, Lennox. Again, Mr. Salahuddin Nasruddin is saying my questions are too soft to the candidate. And that's why we're inviting you this evening, for those of you in New York. I know Mr. Salahuddin is in Florida, I think. But this afternoon at 2 o'clock, an hour from now, we will be at the Queen's Library. And please come with your direct question to Mr. Schumann, and I'm sure he'll be able to answer those questions. Again, time is running out, and a lot of unanswered questions. Mr. Schumann, for the next minute or two, can you give us some commitments and tell us exactly, again, what will a President Schumann do to Guyanese in his first term in office?
Thank you. I think one of the things that we have to look at is, let's look at the reasons why Guyana is in this state. We've permitted racial politics to infiltrate the system and to become operable in every facet of society and institutions. Compared to looking at the merit upon which people are going to apply for positions in that sense, I think we would have seen the massive stink, if I were to put it that way, that the PPP brought up when they hired the DCEO for GCOM. It should not be about what color a person is, it should be about what competence they have. And when we start doing that, we are going to see a transformation in the system. What the Liberty and Justice Party intends on doing is just that. Let's look at the meritocracy. Let's look at how we are going to find competent people in the system. We are looking at transforming the police services so that when they have an opportunity to address crime, it is not in this sort of, what I'd say, mishmash measure that they're doing right now. You are going to have police officers who are not just high school graduates. You go and pass 2 subjects. You're going to have a comprehensive background check. You are going to have a psychometric evaluation to ensure that you're suited for the job. And obviously, you're going to have to go through a lie detector test cyclically, along with drug tests, so that now you are going to find people with integrity in these institutions. What we intend on doing is leveling the playing field so that Guyanese are the core beneficiaries of the patrimony of Guyana. You're not going to have massive tax breaks in that sense for multinationals. When our own Guyanese in the diaspora want to go back and reinvest, and we cannot provide the avenues for them to go back and reinvest. I think those are some of the immediate things that we could look at.
All right, and that is really coming to the end of the program. I know Mr. Schumann this afternoon at our meeting, maybe you can answer the question that Salim is asking. How does you plan to fund your the programs in your manifesto? And another question was, this is dual citizenship. We know you're a citizen of Canada, and for you to be a candidate, you'll have to, I think the Canadian government allow you to put it on hold. They did that before to other citizens when they go back to their country. And are you in that position? Again, our time is running out, so you can't answer the question now, but I hope that you can answer it for us this evening, all those questions and more. So again, I want to thank you, Mr. Schumann.
Charles, give me 30 seconds.
Okay.
I'm sure that the viewers would not mind.
Okay.
How do we intend on doing that? Corruption, let's say the smuggling of gold, for example, is 15,000 ounces a week. That was reported by Mr. Trotman. The minute you start plugging that, that is $1.2 billion a year that could go towards development. And that is only one part. When we start to plug the holes of corruption, you are going to see maybe 2/3 of the GDP in returns into the government coffers to be able to fund the very plan. Not forgetting that we are also going to be benefiting from oil revenues, that's one. The second thing is the dual citizen. You know, I was at a discussion, and I think it was one of the PPP media reporters who came and said, well, do you have any proof of relinquishing your dual citizenship? What I wanted to say to them and to everyone who is asking that question is that the Constitution demands it, and we are a law-abiding party. We intend on respecting the Constitution, and I fully intend on undertaking that. But if anyone wants to see the proof of it, and I know most of this emanates from the PPP camp, I would say when we see Mr. Irfan Ali's transcript, then I'm going to give them that proof.
Okay, Mr. Schumann. You're like our president here saying, okay, I'm not releasing my tax return because it's audit. Good question, but yeah, I guess our politicians need to be honest with the Guyanese people. If Mr. Irfan Ali says that he's a qualified person, then what is wrong with showing us your transcript? I have a bachelor's degree, I have a master's degree, I can show that. I have a CPA license. That is easy. You can view it online, actually. So things, people should be able to show what they have and to ensure that that happens. So I know, Mr. Schumann, as you said, you will relinquish your Canadian citizenship to run for the office of president. And I know that the Guyanese people have full confidence that you will make a great president. Again, we want to thank our audience for tuning in, watching us. Again, GlobeSpan is doing these programs. A lot of it is on Noel's, on GlobeSpan's, Nohar's expense. I want to encourage you again, if you like the program, and our viewership is a couple million people view all the programs within GlobeSpan. So your advertising dollar will go a far way. We're asking again, please support the program so we can continue to meet the Guyanese people and to extend, to tell them what we can do. Call Nohar at GlobeSpan and he will be able to tell you how you can help with us. I'm also extending invitation to Mr. Irfan Ali and to President Granger. If you're in New York at any time, or even with where you are, and you want to come on our program, please feel free to come as Mr. Schumann did. And I want to wish all our political parties contesting the next election all the best, that we'll have a safe election cycle without violence, without fear, and the people of Guyana will go and vote on issues and not on race. And I want to thank you again for our audience. Mr. Schumann, again, welcome to New York, and I hope you have a pleasant day with us here in the New York area. Thank you so much, and God bless you. Amen.
Thank you.